Hello everyone, it's 10 Types, and today I think we need to talk about Charizard EX. Charizard EX is really good, and I think I underestimated it a little. I don't know if it's definitively the best deck. I think there are other decks that can definitely challenge it, but it's really good. I mean, it is the best deck. Okay, I I thought that other decks like Lost One would be able to beat it, and they kind of can, but they're not honest. Like Boston has consistency issues. That mean they can't quite go as fast as Charizard all the time. And Charizard's really consistent. And yeah, I wanted to talk about it and break it down as well because recently, I think it might have been yesterday or maybe the day before, I made a video covering some of the biggest flaws in every top deck, and I honestly I didn't plan it as I went into it because I assumed they'd be kind of obvious, but they weren't as obvious for Charizard as at all. Right? There are ways to counter Charizard, but those like quote counters have counters in themselves. So they are like counters that Charizard can play, and I'm going to talk about some of those and why it's really hard to beat. Um, I also mentioned I made a video on how to beat control, and one of the tips was to play certain cards, and now lists are starting to do that, which is really interesting. But anyway, Charizard EX itself is really good. It is a Terra EX, so it is immune to bench damage, which is actually pretty nice. There are some weird things going on here. It is not immune to Stabilize. It's not immune to Iron Crown EX, but it is immune to Radiant Greninja. And I don't know. There isn't that much spread. Sableye is a lot of it, and Iron Crown EX is also a lot of it, but you are immune to Radiant Greninja, which is pretty nice. Outside of that, so the Terra EX thing isn't that big of a deal, although you are Darkness type, which is really nice, as Darkness is weak to Grass, occasionally fighting, or sometimes fighting, but in this case it's Grass. And that means that if your opponent is running a Grass deck, they will be hitting you for weakness, which isn't ideal. But of course, you do use Fire Energy, so you can play Fire attackers, and you'll play some, unless have been playing more as well. And if you do that, then you will beat Grass, right? Grass does not love to play against Fire. Outside of that, you do have high HP as well at 330, meaning that if your opponent isn't playing Grass or a deck like really Chimp-How, they probably won't be able to one-shot you. Certainly they can. There are a lot of decks that can get there, but it's pretty awkward, pretty difficult. If you look at like Giratina V-Star, they can run Grass things, they often do, but outside of that, they usually run one Iron Leaves EX, but outside of that, they need like a maximum belt on their Giratina V-Star or the Giratina V-Star's V-Star power. So you need to use these like really difficult to power up things outside of grass text, and even grass text you actually trade evenly with. Like Iron Leaves, one shots you, one shot them. It's a little more complicated than that, but not that much more complicated. And so that's really nice. Your typing is really good. And then your energy attack to fire 180, 30 more for each prize your opponent's taken. 180 early game is like pretty decent. It pretty much keeps even with most of the meta, and then this will build as the game goes on and become more powerful than all the other attackers. There are certain scenarios when this isn't enough, but notably a lot of decks are playing basic EXs, and you can use Maximum Belt. And Maximum Belt has been a nice little addition to Charizard, and I think has made it better. I don't think it's made it drastically better, but I think it has made it better. And then the ability is really what puts it over the edge. Infernal Rain, when you play as Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you search your deck for up to 3 basic Fire Energy cards and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. Pretty much you just use this to set up Charizard EX, but it does mean that you don't have to search your deck for energies. You can use this to power Pokemon up. Notably, Gouging Fire EX is sometimes played, and Radiant Charizard EX is usually played, but you can power it up earlier now. And Radiant Charizard is really good as well. It just is really powerful because, I mean, it just does a lot of damage and it's a basic Pokemon and is relatively cheap. It's cheap late game, only 1 energy if your opponent's ready taking 4 of their prize cards. So it's really powerful, and this can be used to set it up some, but the main thing is you're just going to set up Charizard itself, which means it's super low maintenance. Like it's a stage 2, right? It's a stage 2, which seems awkward, but honestly, stage 2s are pretty good right now. They are like playable at the very least, and Charizard's good because it's so low maintenance. Versus you look at um, like Arcaps is kind of hard to get into play. Caliber, and they're support Pokemon, so they're not dying every turn. But even they're kind of hard to get up. But Charizard, you don't need like extra energy. You literally just need Charizard, and then you're good to go. And if you get 2 Charizards up, you're pretty much set for the entire game in terms of attackers. And there are certain counters as well. So I actually want to talk about. I'll talk about Pidgeot next. Pidgeot EX is being played with the deck, and the really good thing is Path to the Peak was a big counter to Charizard EX and Pidgeot EX because they're both rule box Pokemon with abilities. Pidgeot has Quick Search, allowing you to search for any card every single turn, only once, so you can't do double Pidgeot, but it's still really good. 280 HP is on the lower end, and I think is one of the biggest downsides to this deck, because notably, like the Iron Hands, like Future Box or Future Hands or whatever, Turbo Hand. I've heard a lot of different terms for the deck, and some are different, but they more pretty much as Iron Hands. Um, and Iron Hands will not potentially and probably likely one-shot Pidgeot EX for 3 prizes, which isn't great for you. But it is what it is. Hopefully, you might lose because of that, but you can giant keep this. You can do certain things. You probably aren't not in a regular deck, but there are options. But its ability is really good. You don't want to put it into play every game though, and if you can, then you have some issues. But we'll talk about that as well. You do a free treat though, and of course your ability is just really good for setting up. And when you're already running a stage 2, it essentially is an easy slot into the deck, especially when you don't have too much stress on your deck space. And as I mentioned, Charizard EX is low maintenance, so you do have the ability to play more attacks despite being a stage 2, or at least more deck spaces. And then with Pidgeot EX, you have the option to put in more attacks, and also you get more consistency. One thing I will say is that some people don't love Charizard because of its lacking consistency. It's not that bad, but you can always increase consistency, reduce attacks. As we'll look at with these lists, a lot of them run a good chunk of attacks, but you can cut. I don't know how many attacks they run. I'm actually going to pull up the first general list, and it runs Manphy, um, Radiant Charizard. You could call it Tech Airy, like TMs from the tools. Like you could cut probably like 5 to 10 cards here if you just want to add consistency, but you don't need to, right? So we'll talk about that in just a minute. I guess I'll talk about it now. You have 4 Iono, 4 Arvin, a Research, 4 Ultra Ball, 3 Nest Ball, Lumineon V and Rotom V, as well as Pidgeot EX, your engine once that gets set up, and 4 Steel Stone. Potentially, if you prize 4 Steel Stone, things kind of get a little awkward if your hands are really terrible. But Lumineon V is really great in the deck. Again, Lumineon V, and to some extent Rotom V, but not really. But Lumineon V is vulnerable to the 3 prize knockout by Iron Hands EX, so your opponent can just do Lumineon V, Pidgeot EX to knock those out for game. So you need to be careful of that. But outside of that, I mean, Lumineon V is really good in this deck, as it does get you that supporter to get you set up. Lumineon V, its ability is search for a supporter on play, and well, it is a one-time. Oh, and it doesn't work with Nest Ball. I think a lot of people know that, but some of you might not. So keep in mind, Lumineon V, its ability will not be put into effect with Nest Ball because it's of how it's played. But anyway, so it's really good because it's a one-time thing. It's kind of like a foothold into Pidgeot EX. You just take that like 1 step or maybe 2 steps. You can also use 4 Steel Stone. Often Lumineon V, 4 Steel Stone are used together. Yeah, we'll talk about some other techs that work with it as well. The last card is going to be, so Pidgeot EX means if your opponent hits you with a late game Iono or Roxanne, you're probably fine. Certainly there are bad things that can happen to you, but they're not that bad. I mean, most of the time you're able to escape that. Last for the, I guess, the main pieces, we do need to talk about Charmeleon, which is actually really good. At 90 HP is like cool, I guess, but doesn't matter too much. Combustion 50 for 2 again, like whatever. But the big thing here is Flare Veil. Prevent all effects of attacks done to this Pokemon from used by your opponent's Pokemon done to this Pokemon. So if your opponent is running Mimikyu, they can't damage you at all, essentially, which is really great. The other Charmeleon isn't really played at all. I want to see, yeah, okay, yeah, here. Someone is playing it in this list. But I don't think it doesn't do as well with what was I gonna say? I mean, it just not. It doesn't really counter Mimikyu, right? So it's not immune to the effects of the tax. It actually is interesting. It kind of trades evenly, but yeah, it's not the same as the other Charmeleon, which is really nice. Because this Charmeleon is really good because I mean it's just going out here and it's beating Mimikyu every time because Mimikyu just can't damage you. Of course there is always counterplay, but it's awkward, right? Anyway, so that's it with the main attackers, but they are really good. And Charizard EX, as I said, the best thing is its low maintenance, which is so good. Like, it's so good, and we'll take a look at that. Within the lists, First, going on to a standard list here, I think there is nothing super interesting. We do see Airy popping in, and TM Devolution, and Lost Vacuum, and Collapse Stadium. Also, sorry, I am tired. I did just kind of wake up. But yeah, those cards are all like disruption cards, kind of. Collapse Stadium does let you get your Lumineon V and or Rotom V and or Manaphy, I guess, out of play, which can be useful, or even like a damage Radiant Charizard, or sorry, Charizard EX, or well, I guess Radiant Charizard 2, but probably not the damage Radiant Charizard thing. But this allows you to like get cards out of play. It's a nice little hack. It is a stadium bump. There are times when you might need to bump a stadium as well. But yeah, Charizard EX here is just really good against a lot of things. If your opponent is vulnerable to disruption, and you have those 4 Ionos as well. So if your opponent is vulnerable to disruption, if they're super reliant on a tool or on like if they're Chimp Excalibur is obviously reliant on Excalibur. You have TM Devolution, which can really set them back. And then you do have, of course, tools as well. I think this is a deck that is able to use Arven well. Arven searches for a tool and an item. Of course, with an item, you can get Ultra Ball or Nest Ball or Rare Candy. You also are able to use Buddy Buddy Poffin well. Being able to use that, or Buddy Buddy Poffin. I don't remember if that's what I said. But yeah, and this is also really great. It's not like insanely useful. It obviously doesn't grab Rotom or Lumineon or Charizard, Radiant Charizard, but it grabs a lot of things. So you're able to use your items very well, which is great for Arven because we lost Battle VIP Pass, which was like good, but also it had its downsides. But now with Arven and Buddy Buddy Poffin next, they're able to use this well, are in a really great spot. And that is a few decks, but most notably Charizard, because it does run multiple different Pokemon that are searchable with it, which is always good. It's almost the only deck to do that. I actually want to check in the top 10 if there are any other decks that can get multiple Pokemon. I guess Chimp Excalibur can get Bidoof and Frigibax, which is like good, but I guess it's a very similar thing to Charizard, and that's why the deck's so good, despite being not that good. I mean, it's not a super powerful deck, but it's not a super consistent deck, but it is performing well, and that's partially because of Buddy Buddy Poffin. But anyway, the reason Charizard's good isn't just Buddy Buddy Poffin, or isn't really that dependent on it, but it is nice. It just has this nice little boost. One thing I do want to say is it is the deck. I might be. I haven't decided my upload schedule, but Pokemon is printing some, or announced that they're printing some Charizard counters. There's one in particular. So that's something to keep an eye out for because I do think this will be the deck that is going to get a lot of counters printed to it. Kind of like how Mew VMAX was previously and Eternus VMAX was before that, and things like that. So I predict we'll see a few Charizard counters. And we've already started to see them with like Iron Leaf ZX, but I think we'll begin to see more. And you can run Counter Catcher as well, which is nice. You don't run Prime Catcher, which is the biggest downside of the deck. You do really kind of need Maximum Belt in some time, in some circumstances, which is also not great because Maximum Belt is one of the few ace specs that there isn't really a comparable counterpart to. There is Defiance Band. There is Choice Belt, which is pretty different. I mean, it works on different Pokemon. There's Vitality Band. There are all these cards that are like kind of similar, but not really the same at all in actual use cases. So yeah, Maximum Belt doesn't have a great replacement. The best one I would say is Defiance Band, but again, it's not really the same. It doesn't do as much increased damage. So, but you do have Charizard, which is able to like ramp up later on. So hope maybe you just need to like wait another turn, which isn't great. Falling behind a turn can definitely cost you a game, but you know it does have the ability to come back. And I think that's it for this list. This is just a standard Charizard list. You do have like Airy as well. So you are a deck that is able to kind of take a turn off from a supporter, which is really nice because you have a solid draw engine. It is a little risky though, so keep that in mind. We'll take a look at that again later. So next up, this list is like another, I guess, quote. I was gonna say traditional. I don't know. This is not a Pidgeot Charizard list. I'm sure you can see that, but it doesn't run Barrel instead. And also runs Squirvet. It runs Sandshrew, which is a fun little tech, stopping 200 cards from your opponent's discard to be recovered into their deck by items or supporters. Honestly, I'd like kind of forget this card exists. It's not a bad card though. It's an interesting little tech card against certain scenarios, notably Control, which we'll talk about more later. Charizard is notoriously bad against control, or I don't know if I'd say notoriously bad, but it's generally not the best against it. But yeah, you do have Sandshrew to help with that a little bit. And then the interesting thing here is you do have like you just have a lot more basic options, basic text, but you also like because they're easier to search out. We do have Jirachi, which I'm not a big fan of. I said this before, but there are certain scenarios when it is useful, especially with like Squirvet. Yeah, and then you do run like higher counts of boss and other stuff, and you are still relying on Arven. You have TM evolution as well. That is one thing that the barrel engine is set up. You can set up with. I was gonna say set upable. I don't know if that's a word, but you can set up a barrel with TM evolution. You can't really do that with Pidgeot. You could try. Um, I've never really seen anyone do it though. It's certainly worse because it searches for a Pokemon that directly evolves, and most lists don't run Pidgeotto, right in between the two. So yeah, but then yeah, this list is pretty similar as well. Not too much crazy to say about it. I just wanted to let you know that there are the two builds. The barrel doesn't give you that precision though. It's why it's generally not played as much. But you can combine the two together, as in this list. Also, Cleffa, I think is a card that like so Rotom V and Cleffa are kind of the same. Cleffa is its attack, but it's like free and stuff. And as Charger does set itself up, you can manually retreat turn one or really anytime, assuming you have the opportunity to do so. This list also does run Professor Toad's scenario, right? Professor Toad's scenario plus Team Yell Cheer. I mentioned this in my how to counter control video, and it's like, yeah, it's a really great way to do it. The list doesn't run Maximum Bell, which can get you into a little bit of trouble, meaning that there are certain matchups where you're not able to push advantages or yeah, mostly you're not able to push advantages, notably against like Iron Hands and mostly Iron Hands, but not being able to push that advantage can again cost you games because Iron Hands is able to counter your Lumineon V, your Pidgeot EX, and so you want to avoid putting those into play. You can get them out of play with Collapse Stadium and Professor Terra's scenario, but I mean you don't really want to discard your Pidgeot EX. You don't want to Professor Terra's scenario either, but you can. But you do have a barrel to lean back on. Obviously, the list does run a good chunk of one ofs, as do many of the lists. So you do have some consistency issues, especially if those one ofs aren't Hisuian Heavy Ball searchable. We don't actually see Hisuian Heavy Ball in, and I know we do see it in the one list, but not in most lists. But you can run it. And this next list is pretty similar as well. Um, but we do see some more control action going on here. We have Regieleki. Regieleki is a really fun card. Also, we do see Lost City, Mist Energy, Hero's Cape as well. But then we have Regieleki, one of my favorite cards. Regieleki has put a trainer from your discard pile into your hand. This is useful against, I guess, control. You can Professor Toad's scenario. You just have all these great options. I think Professor Terra's scenario plus Regieleki is an interesting combo. You can Regieleki for other stuff, giving you control options, or more importantly, counter control options. So this is or like control counter, sorry. And so you do have like a lot of interesting again options here. One thing I don't love about this deck, I think Arven, you need to run at least 4 tools for Arven, but I know some people disagree on that. Um, yeah, you just have these great options. As I said, I don't think this Charmeleon is ideal. I would run the other one if you are scared of Mimikyu. But then you do have like Regieleki, I guess, which is kind of helping you counter. I don't know. I'm not a massive fan of that, but of the Charmeleon. But yeah, you do have Cleffa as well. Cleffa is really nice. I think some people think it's like terrible, and some people think it's amazing. And it's really just a pretty decent Pokemon. But yeah, so then we see pretty similar stuff. But then we see this last list, and this is just where it all kind of comes together, and you realize that this deck's like absolutely bonkers. It's so good. And this is like a control list, but Charizard EX. Charizard EX is so self-sufficient, and Fire is actually a really solid type in terms of the fact that you have Pidgeot EX and Radiant Charizard. And those two Pokemon are really great, and they are pretty great in control. Radiant Charizard's a little weird, it's kind of complicated, and Charizard EX fulfills a similar role, but it's still really interesting. In this deck, you only run a few energies. You run 4 basic fire and a mist energy. And then you do run Snorlax, and you run Mimikyu, and then you run Eric's Invitation. And all these control cards. First Terra scenario as well for stall action, as well as Penny. And Deez's Help. Deez's Help, broken card. Not broken card. It's an okay card. It's a much better card than people think. It's draw 2 with locate your face down prizes, giving you access to them through Arc Throne or taking prizes. high counts of airy, and a very heavily disruptive deck that can also attack and can also not attack. You don't have to be attacking to win with this deck or to be doing damage. I guess most of your attacks do damage. But yeah, I think this is just really interesting. You can mix it in with control. I mean, there's so many options. With the Pidgeot and Charizard EX, you have insane consistency. Candy is like just in a really great spot right now as well, with Arven and Irida as well. That's partially why Chimp Excalibur is so good. But I honestly think Charizard EX, it's really good. I think we'll see counters and we'll see counterplay. I mentioned Mimikyu. There is a Lone Vulpix V-Star, which doesn't really have a way to counter it with Charizard, other than Gouging Fire. I guess Gouging Fire EX would be the play. And you do have like things you need to kind of be aware of. But overall, Charizard's in such a good position. Is probably, I mean, it's the best deck right now. I didn't want to admit it, but I'm gonna admit it. It is the best deck. It is counterable, but as I said, you have Professor Terracenary to counter Snorlax control, and Charizard. It's really good. But anyways, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts down below in the comments. Tell me if you agree with this or disagree, and what cards you're using to counter Charizard. I'm really interested in hearing, because I haven't found any, as I said, except for some new reveals, which I'll talk about in tomorrow's video, I think. I'm not sure. Yesterday's video, I haven't decided yet. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. As always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.